Well, hello everybody, and welcome to New Hope here. Welcome to the lobby. My name is Hattie, and I'm really glad to have my friends here today.
Woohoo.
And all of my other friends here today. We've got a lot of fun things to talk about. Olivia, welcome.
Hi, thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, really. Wow, good. Raucous applause.
I'd rather Hattie's applause, though.
That's all you're getting today. Welcome, David.
Hello.
David, you're in a different spot today.
Yep.
Because
over here.
we have a really important song for you to play as we start the lobby. David's been practicing. This is just like some good intro music.
Oh.
It's definitely not our theme song.
Okay, let's hear it. Welcome to the lobby, everyone. I hope you guys are dancing with us too.
Please.
For those of you, maybe you haven't been joined us yet this month, it's Hot Dish Month.
Woohoo! You know
guys-
what? Hot Dish Month gets raucous applause
Yeah, we
as
do
well.
that too, yes. Everybody should applause for Hot Dish Month. Last
Definitely.
week, we missed out on the hot dish, but this week, my mom and I made a hot dish together.
Fun.
And
So far, we're 2 for 2 on moms helping with
Ooh.
hot dishes. My mom did a little more than help with the hot dish, as I did nothing, and she just made it.
Sure.
Oh,
But
yeah.
we need more. We got to keep getting moms to make us hot dish.
Next week, if you're a mom and you want to make a hot dish, we'll take it.
I mean, I feel like that's true year round for
That's- yeah.
everybody involved. Michael's
Anytime.
off screen right now,
Yeah.
but I think he'll take your hot dish anytime if you would like
If
to.
next week doesn't
drop
work,
it
that's
off.
fine. You
Yeah.
know, we'll figure it out.
Maybe it'll make the lobby, maybe we'll just eat it. It's hard
Right.
to say, yeah.
Yeah.
But I did help Dawn.
That's good.
It was a team effort. She did most of it.
Dawn is your mom.
Dawn is my mom, yes.
For those of you
Oh,
Yeah.
here that don't
Hey,
know
Dawn.
Hattie's entire family.
Yes, thank you for that. Producer, that's the word I was looking for. Could you please tell us when it's time to eat hot dish? I've got a lot of things we need to talk about today.
Okay, how much time
Oh,
do you think you
boy.
need to eat hot dish?
I don't know. A couple
Interesting.
minutes,
Okay.
maybe?
Okay.
Because we have to scoop it out to tell you how to eat it, because there's
Right.
a very...
That
like,
does seem to be quite the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a way to eat it, too.
Okay.
That's
I'll let you
important. Okay. So, the one thing I am wondering, it was just Halloween.
Yeah.
What'd you guys dress up as? Did you dress
Woohoo.
up?
I dressed up as Daphne from Scooby-Doo.
What?
Oh, crazy. It's fun. That's it.
I was Velma, so that's why she's, Daphne and Velma. It's a great combo.
Yeah.
What about you, David?
That was some dynamic storytelling from the two of you. I was Ash Ketchum's dad.
Okay.
Last
that?
year, I was Ash Ketchum is the main character from the Pokemon anime.
Oh, right.
Olivia was all over it.
She was.
That's
I
why
adored
we
it.
had it. Yeah. Last year, I was Hulk's dad. Shockingly similar costumes.
Okay.
You'd be
Oh,
surprised.
I'm Daphne from Scooby-Doo, but I'm also Spidey's mom.
But in
So-
your scenario, you're actually wearing a costume, whereas I just dress like myself, and when people
Oh,
ask me
we're
what my
two in one.
costume
Come
is,
on.
I just say, I'm Hulk's dad.
So creative.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Pretty proud of it. But our trunk was decorated as Ivysaur, and Joanna did a pretty incredible job. It's a Pokemon. So it's got
Okay.
like a giant bulb on the top of it, and then a huge face with eyes and
Oh, wow.
tongue,
Cool.
and then there's
Of
Pokeballs
course, Joanna's
everywhere.
gonna rock that.
Yeah, and it took her like 8 minutes.
Wow,
I'm
of
barely
course.
exaggerating.
She can come to our trunk.
I was like, I could have worked on that for about
Next
6 years, and it would not look like what it looks like.
For those of you, so we do trunk or treat at our Williston campus every year. It's so fun. We get
pretty good
it's just
time.
like so many kids that go through. People decorate their trunks. People dress up, maybe even as their kid's dad. But we
It's
love.
pretty special costume.
We love.
Yeah.
Last
trunk
year,
or treat.
Michael was wasn't he Pat Sajak from
Yeah.
Wheel of Fortune?
Wheel of Fortune.
And they had like a
Yeah.
Wheel of Fortune game. It was
It
pretty
was
great.
so good.
It was
lot,
the coolest.
lot to live up to this year.
Yeah, Michael.
always rock
I know
it.
you're not on. By
We'll have him
microphone
talk.
right now.
He can talk about it next week.
Okay.
He can talk about it next week.
That sounds good.
He should be back on the
because
lobby
his
next week.
family always does a whole theme together.
really fun.
Yeah.
It is.
Picture and post.
All right,
Yes.
okay,
Picture and
there's-
post.
Yes.
As producer, I'll make sure that there's a picture in post. I'm
Thank
getting
you.
glared
Do that,
at by
David.
Michael
Thank
right
you,
now.
producer. For
Good
can we
job.
please just have all of our because we're a family costume?
Yeah.
Is that okay, producers?
I think we can probably
There's
get a
some nodding.
photograph
Okay.
of all of our
Okay.
trunks. Yeah.
Also, we'd love to know what you guys wore for Halloween. If you're Halloween people, if you went trick or treating, what was your costume? What was your guys' favorite thing that you ever dressed up as?
Oh boy.
My favorite thing was when I stopped dressing up, which was in like 3rd grade.
Okay, 2nd grade.
Maybe even earlier than that, to be honest.
Oh, Michael's taking over.
I think Michael wants the. Nope, not that one. There,
That's
yeah,
the
that
one.
one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember my mom made me a Batman costume one year, and I wore it, and then I was like, do I have to do this every year, or can I just?
So sad.
Do I
But
have
you
to dress
can't.
up?
Never do
You
that
get
again?
candy.
I still got candy. Every year we would go to Target the day after Halloween, and my mom would let me pick 2 bags
That's
of
the
any
move.
candy I
That's
wanted
the
out
move.
for
That's
not the
50%
same
off.
as getting,
Not the
like,
You're right.
candy
Like,
It was
what are you
way
gonna
better.
get? You're gonna get like this cool candy from this house. Some houses you get soda. Some houses you
Soda?
get popcorn.
The question should actually be,
Yeah.
what's the weirdest thing you've gotten from trick-or-treating?
Okay, what's yours?
Clearly, there's a story behind that question.
Well, ironically, this actually fits really well because I got
Hot dish.
I got cream of mushroom in a can, and my brother got a banana.
A banana
from
from the same house.
And he goes, "We're just cleaning out a pantry this year." And
That's one way to do
what
it.
we got.
Did you eat the cream of mushroom?
I didn't. I did not. I thought it was like poisoned or something.
She drank the
was my
cream of
thought.
mushroom.
Yeah.
Like if anyone was gonna, poison their candy on Halloween, it would be this guy.
A can? You can't poison
You
your
never
can.
know. You never know.
I think it's sealed
We've
normally.
derailed. You have maybe a minute before you need to get
Oh
to the
my
hot
gosh!
dish.
Oh no!
Wait, what is
So,
your favorite thing that you
if you-
dressed up as?
I was Pink Power Ranger for a couple of years, and it felt like
couple
a
of years.
victory because
That was, what, 2 years ago?
no,
3
that was
years
a long
ago.
time
Couple
ago.
of
okay.
years straight.
Well, everybody knows the Pink Power Ranger was cooler than the yellow one, and somehow I got to be the pink one and not the
Okay,
yellow
I think
one.
that puts some distance between us because yellow is definitely the best one.
Really
It's okay.
interesting.
I never liked the Power Rangers.
Oh, such a great movie.
That was never a movie. Wasn't it a show?
Well, it was a show, but it was also a movie.
Oh.
I'm gonna tell you guys an embarrassing
Oh no!
story.
Please,
boy.
we'll go long on the lobby this week if we need to.
I have this like vivid memory of being a kid watching the Power Rangers movie in my room, and I was probably cleaning because I feel like my whole childhood was cleaning my really messy room. And at one point, the Pink Power Ranger like did this spin and kick, and it was like so cool. Like she was so tough. And so I would open my drawer to like my dresser
my
drawer.
gosh.
Oh no.
And I would spin and kick it closed like I was kicking the bad guy. Really great.
Do you think maybe
Great
you
moment.
could show us how to do that?
Next episode. Next
Okay.
episode.
Can we have the
of Lobby.
producer put in a video in post of you doing that? I think we're gonna get that one's approved as well.
Let's
Oh,
go
wow,
ahead and
okay.
just do a Power Ranger month,
I'm gonna veto that. We're not doing that.
I mean, I was probably like 7, so I don't know if I could still do it.
You should probably get moving on the hot dish.
Okay. I'm really
If
sad
there's-
because there's something I was hoping to talk about. We'll have to save
Well-
for next time. So join us
Okay.
next week because we have a really good episode.
So you're hosting again next
Yeah,
week?
absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Okay. So I made hot dish, and this is called goulash. Have you guys ever had goulash?
I actually have
Yeah,
not.
I have
Yeah.
had goulash. It's delicious.
This is Dawn's recipe for goulash. And she said, so like we eat pretty healthy in our family, and she said you have to have Velveeta cheese, which is not, it's just like
Oh.
not real cheese, it's fake
Weird
cheese.
move.
Sorry for those of you who eat Velveeta cheese. It's
I mean, you
real
eat
cheese.
Velveeta cheese.
Yeah.
So.
So it's Velveeta cheese on top, and when we would eat it, you have to like have the whitest bread with a lot of butter, which you guys saw me putting butter on the bread.
You were, I'm not exaggerating. You were slathering it on like it was peanut butter.
Oh, no.
and we
Which
always,
is not my favorite. But,
really okay. Thank
we'll
you.
see what happens.
And we would
Everybody say hi to Mike. Wait,
Michael.
there's
Michael.
Michael.
Go back in. Oh yeah.
make Raucous applause.
I feel like we need to make it so the
boy,
raucous applause
thanks.
fades out.
And you have to make a goulash
There we
sandwich
go.
to really eat it right. So you put the
Oh.
goulash
That's like a whole
on
process.
Oh, it
The-
doesn't smell bad.
the white bread, and you like
boy.
sandwich it. So it has to be like not good quality bread, like so you can smush it and then eat it. Michael, you'll get some too. Everybody gets goulash
Do you
today.
want this one?
Okay, so I put it on my bread.
Yep,
Here's my bread.
with lots of butter.
I'm assuming it's okay that the butter's on the inside.
Yes, that's where
Just
you
never
want
know with how much
Michael-
butter you're putting on
it. Michael, you get some too.
Thank you, Michael. Michael gave me the laughter that I was hoping for with that question. Hattie answered it very seriously, which concerned me.
This is a really healthy hot dish if you guys haven't
Interesting,
picked up on it.
I mean, there are
it?
vegetables in there.
I was gonna
I
say.
can see colors.
My
I
mom
don't
always
even know how
sneaks
to do
vegetables
this.
into stuff. There is butter all over my bowl. I think it touched my bread. That has
sounds
a lot
right.
of butter. I'm really excited to watch
I
Olivia
kinda-
do this without on the table.
We're running low on time, so
Okay.
we need to
I
get
want to
into
see
the
you
hot
guys
dish
try
time.
because I
Okay.
tried it as we were cooking it.
Michael's already getting after
Michael's
it
gone.
over there.
He's
off-
eating the
he's just
hot dish.
consuming
He's
food
actually
off
in his
camera.
second helping.
If you guys haven't yet told us about your favorite hot dish, we would love
Yes, we would.
we would love to hear about it. We
Please.
hope that you're eating hot dish with us right now, wherever you're at. How fun would that be?
Oh my
We
word.
really hope that you are.
Pause. Go ahead and make your hot dish
Yep.
and then come back.
Come back and eat hot dish with Olivia and
If you're
Stephen.
joining us live, don't do that.
Yeah.
Oh,
don't
right.
go.
Because we want you to worship with us and listen to the message.
But then
You know,
after,
that's
make
probably
some hot dish and watch it again.
It's a lot of butter,
Okay.
which
David,
I feel like masks how delicious the hot dish is because
Interesting.
I think it's really delicious.
Okay.
But I'm tasting a lot of butter.
sorry, too much butter.
No,
I would
that's-
never have thought butter would. You could have too
It's
much
not like
butter.
it's making it gross. It's
Yeah.
just it's a lot of butter.
Yeah, it's dairy-free butter.
I really like this hot dish.
It's called
this is very good.
goulash. Then my mom has no recipe for it. She just throws stuff in the pan. So I was like, Mom,
I
can
respect that.
Is it different every time?
No, it's pretty similar every time, but there's no recipe.
It's very good.
Thank you.
I like it a
That's
lot.
done.
Thanks, Dawn.
In vegetables from our garden.
Okay, I gotta say, actually, I like the butter.
Yeah.
Like,
You
I
need the
like the
butter.
amount that you've put on.
Thank you, Olivia.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for my attack on
It
butter.
compliments it.
I just have
well.
never heard someone say, "Wow, that's too much butter on
Oh.
my toast."
Joanna's grandpa, before he passed away, Papa, would just eat butter. He was from Norway. He came over after World War II, and he would just like cut a slice of butter and just eat it. And I don't understand that world, but he was like one of the coolest humans I ever met. So maybe
Yeah.
I need to broaden my butter horizons.
Well, try it.
Yeah.
Don't. That's not good for you, actually. Butter is great, but on its own.
I can't
I
stop
think
eating it.
It
It's
is
our
very
time.
good. I think we're over
Yeah.
time. We should probably.
Well,
we should
thank you
probably
for
get to the
joining
service.
us today. We are just really glad that
We
you're
are.
here. We got a great message, a great time of worship for you. So let's go into worship. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to New Hope here. We are so glad that
we
you
are.
joined us today, that you found us. Maybe if this is your first time joining us, you found us.
Here we are.
Yay!
We're right here.
That's so exciting. So special shout out to those of you joining for the first time. And can I give a shout out to our
Please.
gatherings?
Please give a shout out.
Hey,
to our
gatherings, how are you guys
What's up?
doing?
We love you guys.
Yeah, we do.
We're so glad that you're gathering together. We're so glad that all of you are joining us online.
Mm-hmm.
Before we have a really awesome time of worship. Our new mini series Promised Lands continues today. I
So
hope you
good.
were with us last week because Pastor Mike kicked off this new series and it was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And this week we're going into Judges, which is just like a really calm, level
Yeah.
book. There's not a lot that happens
So
in it, so it's just a
kind.
a lot of
Yeah.
kindness and things.
Yeah.
On the contrary, it's going to be a really powerful message, and Pastor Mike is going to talk about this sin cycle that they were caught in, where they kept following God and then going back to their sin, and then following God and going back to their sin. And so one of the songs that we're singing today is called Never Going Back. And so however you join us when you worship with us online, people do it differently. For some people, they stand up and they sing in their living room. Some people sound like me, and so if there's other people in the room, they don't want to sing loudly in
that's
their
like
living
me.
room.
That's me too, yeah.
But however that is, whether you're just kind of sitting and reflecting on the words or you're joining in and singing, I really want you to focus and be intentional as we worship together today, because this song's going to really tie into the message later on. So again, we love you. We're so
Yeah.
glad that you're here, and would you worship with us?
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that thou art. King of heaven, my treasure thou art. Oh God, be my everything, be my delight, be Jesus my glory, my soul satisfied. Oh God, be my everything, be my delight, be Jesus my glory, my soul satisfied. High King of heaven, my victory won. May I reach heaven's joys, oh bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler of all. Still be my vision, O ruler of all. Oh God, be my everything, be my delight, be Jesus my glory, my soul satisfied. Oh God, be my everything, be my delight, be Jesus my glory, my soul satisfied. Oh, yeah. Faithful one, no matter how far I run, you lead me home. You extend your love patiently, fathering the orphan in me. You say I'm your own. I never am alone. I never am alone. You found me, and I've made up my mind. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. I've made up my mind. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. Righteousness found only in your face. You see my heart. You extend your grace. Eyes open, falling in love again. You say I'm your own. It was always you. It was always you. You found me, and I've made up my mind. I'm never going back. singing out your lovely name. I'm giving you everything. You make my soul alive. You put your love inside. I'm singing out your lovely name. I'm giving you everything. You make my soul alive. You put your love inside, and I'm singing out your lovely name. I'm giving you everything. You make my soul alive. You put your love inside, and there's nothing that I have need of, 'cause there's nothing you haven't done. You make my soul alive. You put your love inside. And I'm singing out your lovely name. I'm giving you everything. You make my soul alive. You put your love inside, and there's nothing that I'd have need of, 'cause there's nothing you haven't done. You make my soul alive. You put your love inside. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. I've made up my mind. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. You call me your own. I'm never going back. I'm never going back.
Well, hey again, church. Thanks so much for joining us in worship today. We are really glad that you're here, and we want to connect with you. And there's a few ways that you can do that today. If you're joining with us live, chat in the chat box. Let us know your name. Let us know that you're joining with us. We just love to know our New Hope family. We love to know who's joining with us every week. You can also fill out our Connect card. There's a button in the chat for that too, or you can find it on our app. Again, let us know your name, where you're joining from. If you have questions about New Hope here, you can put that on your Connect card. Or if you're looking for ways to get involved, you can put that on there as well.
Yeah, and right now in the chat, you can find a link to our New Hope Here Kids service. It's a service that's designed specifically for your children.
So fun.
What is it? Preschool up to elementary.
You got it.
We do this every week, and I forget every week.
It's because you like to watch it, so you're like, is it for
because,
kids
yeah,
or
it's
is
for
it
everyone, really.
Yeah.
Pastor Andrea, Pastor Anna, they do a great job. Just they have a game. They engage with your children. It's really a lot of fun.
So
and
good.
so we encourage you to click that link, hand a device to your children so they can watch the service that's for them, and then you can watch the service that's for you.
Yeah, and we want to take a moment and just say thank you to those of you who give faithfully, who partner with our mission to help lost people be found and found people grow. So thank you for your faithful giving. Thank you for joining us in our mission. We're just so glad to have you join us every week. And for those of you who don't give, but maybe you join us regularly, we want to just encourage you to pray and talk to God about how you can partner with us in our mission. All the information for giving is on our screen right now.
Yeah, let's pray together, church. God, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you that we get to join together as a church family, whether we're with people in our house or we're just connecting online. God, we just ask that you strengthen our relationship with each other and with you today. And we ask that you, as Pastor Mike shares his message, that you speak to us and just help our lives to just change and be different because of what we've heard today. God, you're so good. We thank you. We love you. We pray this in your Son, Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen.
It was several years ago now, actually, before we moved to North Dakota, that Brendan, our oldest son, and I were on our way early on a Sunday morning to help set up at the church we were helping to plant at the time. And we're coming up to an intersection when this car just flew past us. And I don't know if they could see, or more likely they just weren't paying attention, but we were further back and we could see as they approached the intersection that there was another car approaching the intersection. And we both saw as they were coming close, if one of them didn't slow, if one of them didn't stop, there was going to be a crash, someone was going to die. In fact, both of us, Brendan and I, we were yelling, "Stop, stop, stop," like they could hear us, right? And I don't know if you've ever watched an accident happen. It's like when you know what's going to happen and you can't stop it, it's like you're watching it in slow motion. It's hard to explain. They get closer and closer, and then bam, they hit, and they hit hard enough, both cars went spinning in opposite directions and rolled over. I parked and I told Brendan to stay in the car because I was convinced there was going to be bodies. And by God's grace, I think that there was bruises and blood and probably broken bones, and at least when the ambulances came, everybody was still alive. You know, I think back on that story, and I wonder if that's God's perspective of us sometimes. We're going to go the upper story to begin with this week, and as we've been walking through the Bible, we've been looking at what we're reading through three lenses, and I hope it's helped you. It's really helped me. The upper story, where basically we're looking at it kind of from heaven's perspective, realizing God's at work. Let's look at how He's at work. Sometimes we'll go to the lower story. In fact, we're going to spend a lot of time there this week, looking at the lower story, the historical context. Just reminding ourselves, these were real people with real emotions. And we're going to spend a lot of time this week in my story. Why do these stories matter to us? But here in the upper story, I wonder if God kind of looks down at me sometimes, like me watching that crash. I wonder, as I think back to when I was in high school and I was dating that girl and we were struggling with where's our physical boundaries and the hormones were raging, and wonder if God's going, you're headed for a crash. And so you're going, how did that story end? That's a story for another time. But I'm grateful for God's grace and His deliverance and for His voice. I think there's other times in my life where God spoke and I ignored Him and a crash happened. There's other times in my life where God spoke and I stopped. And I just wonder from His perspective, you ever thought about that for you? Times when you look back on your life, you wish you would have made a different choice. Times when you wish you would have said no to that sin that messed up so many things. You wish you would have listened. Someone would have yelled and got you to slow down or stop before you crashed. You've got your books, turn to chapter 8. Last week we were in the book of Judges and looked at in the book of Joshua and looked at the life of Joshua and Israelites first stepping into the promised land. This week in chapter 8 we're looking at an entire book, and the book of Judges is one of the most frustrating books for me in the entire Bible. And as you read the pages, as you read it this week, you're going to find yourself, I think at times, if you really get into it, yelling at them like Brendan and I were yelling at those cars. Stop, stop, stop. Don't you get it? You're doing it again. You're doing it again. We're learning, and this is week 2 of a 6-week kind of mini-series as we're going cover to cover through the Bible in 31 weeks. We're talking about what it looks like to live in the promised land. And as we talked about last week, the promised land is not a metaphor for health, wealth, and prosperity. That's not a biblical teaching. And neither is it a metaphor for someday in heaven. Promised land living is learning to live life to the full in the middle of a sin-crazed, messy, imperfect world. Promised land living is the life God promises you and me. Jesus called it the life to the full. He promised Abraham and anyone who would follow him that there would be a series of blessings that would happen in our life. Victorious living. See, when we learn how to live the life that was lost in Eden, and God is restoring us, that's a journey from garden to garden, we begin to live victoriously. And Judges is a story after story after story of men and women trying to lead God's people back to God, and then they go back again and then back to God. And I want to start this week by reading the first part of our chapter. It's actually in Judges chapter 2. If you're in your Bible, the first chapter is kind of almost a recap of the end of Joshua and tying up some of the loose ends. Judges chapter 2 is where we'll start, and it's kind of a long passage, so stick with me. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Does that sound familiar? In Exodus, it started out as we were introduced to Moses that Joseph and his generation had died. In Joshua, as we're introduced to Joshua, it started out that Moses and his generation has died. See the connection? And now in Judges, Joshua and most of his generation had died. And Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the land of his inheritance, at Timnah-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mount of Gaash. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, they had passed away. Another generation grew up who neither knew the Lord or what he had done for Israel. That's a sign of bad parenting. The stories and the faith had not been passed on. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals, or Baals are sometimes called. So in the ancient world, gods were identified with geography, and so they thought since they were living this land, they had to serve the gods of this land. But that's part of why God had moved the people out of the land, say this land does not belong to them. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths, other false gods and idols. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. The next page, he sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. You say, that's unjust and compassionate. If you're asking that question, go back and listen again to the first part of last week's message. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress, you think? Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped him. You see this repeating metaphor of God using the relationship between a man and a woman to symbolize our relationship with him. And when we go out of the boundaries of a relationship with him, it's like a husband cheating on his wife or a wife cheating on her husband. It's like prostitution. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. We're going to come back to that verse. And whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people, see the cycle? When the judge died, the people returned. They put it on repeat to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors. This spiral would begin, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Now, we need to do a quick review from the lower story of what's happening here on earth. Israel was now close to 2 million strong, had moved into the promised land, and they'd been there for some 20 years, actually more than that at this point in time. And these were the great, add a few more greats, great-grandchildren of Abraham. And Joshua had led them into that, but now Joshua and his generation were gone. And this repeating pattern that actually started at the beginning of Exodus, we see Joseph and his generation passed, then Moses and his generation passed. It's reminding us that every generation, we talked about it last week, has the opportunity to write a new story. Now it's your turn. Moses is dead. Joshua, now it's your turn. Now in Judges, Joshua is dead. Now it's your turn. And it's here, if we go from lower story to upper story, that we have to step back. We have to step back, and when we remind ourselves from the upper story, God is always at work. God is always involved. And we can see, and we begin to learn all the way back in Genesis, that God never gives up on us. And what he does is always good. And what we see is this repeating pattern, generation to generation. Even though they get caught in sin, even though they get caught in the cycle, the repeating cycle, God does not stop. God does not give up. He's going to be patient until we've made our last choice, until we've made our last decision. And you fast forward to you and to me from an upper story perspective, it's still true of you and me. God's still patient. God still is inviting. God is still pursuing. God is still at work. So let's go back to Judges. In Judges, and as you read the story this week, you'll read this cycle. And as you read through the story, there's a cycle, and it feels like it just speeds up. And there's a couple of reasons it feels like that. One is because it does. It speeds up. But some of it is, as you look back, the previous stories, even all the way back, previous stories, it took a few generations for people to drift away and to turn on God. Now, as you read through Judges, it's happening with increasing frequency and increasingly more quickly. In fact, if we go back to page 104, it's page 105 in your book, right there at the top of the page. And top of the page, in the middle of the first full paragraph, says they quickly, catch that? They quickly turned from their ways of their ancestors. And as you read it this week, you'll see history after history after history. Every generation seems to repeat the same cycle, seems to repeat the same pattern. You just want to say, stop, slow down. They follow God for a while, then they drift. They compromise just a little bit. Then they descend rapidly into rebellion against God. They experience the consequences of living life outside of God's blessing and His design and outside of His protection. And they cry out for deliverance. And God does what we learned all the way back when we looked at the life of Moses. When you ask God for deliverance, He always delivers. He always delivers. And what's God do? It says He would send a judge. Now don't think when you read this of a judge like the Supreme Court. An ancient judge was a person, man or woman, who would give leadership and who brought spiritual leadership. In other words, they would teach right and wrong. They would help people decide how to follow God's best, God's laws, God's morals, God's limits that would produce life. They would help them determine what was right and wrong. So in the case of Israel, judges were people who were called by God to lead and to help them learn once again what they've lost, life under God's leadership. And God would call a person out. Remember, that's what He always does. We keep coming back to that thread. And that person would bring deliverance and bring the people, or at least invite the people to come back to God. They wouldn't always come back. But as you read through this, one of the things that will cause you to scratch your head a little bit is these judges were not perfect people. Remember the thread from Thread series? God is not looking for perfect people. Those don't exist. He's looking for people who would learn to trust Him. And the judges were right there with Israel. These were people who were raised in a violent and increasingly perverted, pagan, pantheistic culture. And when God called them to follow Him, and they often learned, some not very well, along with Israel, how to trust God. And you'll read about people like Deborah. And here's what's so fascinating, and one of the many things I love about God. In a culture that, because of their walking away from God, they increasingly would devalue and abuse and use women, God raised a woman to leadership. Sin always devalues what God values. And when God begins to restore, He begins to show us what life under His leadership could look like. And Deborah's one of those examples. And you're going to read about others with interesting names, but two of the most famous, Gideon and Samson. Gideon had a scared and imperfect faith, and yet he chose, hesitatingly, to learn to trust God. And of course, Samson, long-haired, strong Samson. And his story is a strange story about a very imperfect, very dysfunctional, very messed up guy who was following God and yet gave into sin himself repeatedly, gave into his desires himself repeatedly, gave into anger himself repeatedly. And their stories, as you work through this, are great encouragement to us. And I want to go here to my story, because I think a couple of truths right here up at the front, two promised land truths that still matter to us today. Remember, we're talking about promised land truths, truths that we learn about God and about us and about the world as we're learning to live the promised land life. And then we talk about strategies. How do we live this life? Here's promised land truth number one. God invites you as you are now and grows you from where you are now. God didn't suddenly give these imperfect leaders great leadership, didn't suddenly take Samson's desires away. And we go, why wouldn't he do that? He didn't take away their temptations overnight. He didn't remove their fear overnight. He didn't grow them in the faith giants in a week. And honestly, some of them never became faith giants. He grew them from where they were, from who they are when he called them, and helped them grow. Because when he helps us grow, it makes us stronger. And here's promised land truth number two. The speed and depth of your growth is often determined, probably all the time determined, by how much you're willing to trust his leadership. Now notice what that's not saying. It's not saying your speed and depth of your growth is determined by how much you prove your worth. That's not it. It's by how much you learn to trust him. God invites you to do things that are uncomfortable, that are countercultural. And you've got a choice. Will I trust? Will I trust him? Like we talked about last week. Putting God at the center of our life and making worship the practice of our life is so countercultural. And if we're really to put that in our life, it will make us feel maybe weird. It will inconvenience some other people, but we'll live more victorious. And the more we trust him, the speed and the depth of our life changes. See, whenever I choose not to trust God with an area of my life, I'm actually inhibiting his work. I'm saying no to him. So that's where we're going to start. Those two promised land truths. God invites you as you are now and grows you where you are now. And the speed and depth of your growth is often determined by how much you're willing to trust his leadership. So let's go back to Lower Story, because there's another big lesson here that if you and I understand it, it's going to help you learn to live the life that God promised you to live, a victorious life, not a problem-free life, not a pain-free life, not a crisis-free life, but a victorious life in the middle of a messed up world, a full life on its way to full restoration. And what you'll see is we just read it. So in Judges 2, it actually summarizes it. You'll see this cycle of sin, the sin cycle, and you're going to see it repeated again and again and again, and it gets worse, and it gets deeper, and it gets more frequent. And you're going to see this happening. And what I want us to learn, and what I want to help us with this, is two strategies. The first strategy is how to become aware of the sin cycle, because the same cycle that happened then still happens in our life now. We'll talk about that. The enemy, Satan, sin has not somehow changed its template. It's the same template. Why? Because it still works on us. So here's the first strategy: become aware of the sin cycle. If you've got your books, turn to page 104, 105, or Judges chapter 2, and you can just follow along. Maybe you want to make notes and just highlight verses that go with it. And it always starts with, here's the first one, following God. They would follow God for a while, sometimes for a generation, and they would experience a blessed life. And a blessed life, as we've said before, but I need to keep saying it, doesn't mean no problems, doesn't mean no pain, doesn't mean no work, doesn't mean that everybody is healthy, wealthy, and gosh darn it, everybody likes them. A blessed life is a life marked by God's peace, by God's joy, by God's provision, by God's growth, learning that God often gives us victory through the problems instead of delivering us from the problems. And they would follow God. And then the second step, they would begin to take God for granted. We just began to touch on that last week. As things felt good for a while, they began to look at people who weren't following God and saying, you know what, looks like they might have a little bit better life than me. Or like we talked about a few weeks ago, that God's limits actually produce life. We say, but I think God's limits actually diminish life. And so they would begin to experiment. They begin to compromise just a little bit. And one little compromise wouldn't be a big deal. They'd try it and lightning wouldn't strike. Nothing disaster would happen. And it would start nothing disastrous would happen. It would start subtly. And they'd begin to drift. They'd begin to step. They'd begin to distance. They'd begin to experiment. I did something and, I just kind of felt better about it. So they begin to take God for granted, that the blessed life maybe was something that God didn't provide and God didn't protect. Third thing is they would then begin to live the way they wanted, live the way I want. There would be a rapid descent into rebellion, one pastor said. One compromise at a time eventually leads to living the way that I want to live instead of living according to God's design. And here's the dangerous part about it. Because we begin to take God for granted, we don't move there quickly. It happens subtly. And once we get to kind of a tipping point, then we move into it and we justify it. We say, we can do this. And in Judges 21, it describes this kind of life. It says, in those days, Israel had no king. In other words, they saw no moral authority. And so everyone did as they saw fit. I love another translation. New King James Version says it this way. Does this sound familiar? In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Now, before we look at the last two in the sin cycle, or the last couple in the sin cycle, we need to step to the upper story for just a moment. Because we need to look at what's happening here from God's perspective and connect back. It's a little bit like a previous series, Connect the Threads, because these threads go all the way through. And I want to take us all the way back to the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve sinning. If you weren't with us the very first week of the series, go back and listen to it, because we talked about a template for temptation. And the fact that it still works on us today, questioning God, minimizing consequences, satisfying ourselves first, and ultimately separation from one another and separation from life and God happens. And you look at what's happening in the sin cycle. They question God. Did God really say? Or does it really mean that? Or aren't we taking that a little bit too far? Is it really all that bad? How can this be bad when it feels wrong? You see the pattern? You hear it? And then minimize consequences. Well, this only affects me. That's the biggest lie in the universe. It's not that big of a deal. It's just one time. You hear the subtle drift? And taking God for granted? And then satisfying myself? For Adam and Eve, the fruit looks so good. How can it be wrong? And the promise sounds so good. How can it mess us up? And there's this pattern. I need to take care of myself. I need to satisfy myself. And as you read through the book of Judges, you'll see this pattern being repeated over and over and over again. And what was the result? You're going to see it. Generation after generation of life, covered in Judges, of cycle after cycle, revealing people rolling from one crisis to another. External enemies and dangers and constantly oppress them. Internal dysfunction constantly came to the surface, and they just spiraled. So let's look back. It starts with following God, taking God for granted, living the way I want. Number 4, consequences. when they lived outside of God's design, they're also living outside of God's protection. You say, well, that seems kind of harsh. But think about this. This is like the child whose parents are standing in the way of the hot stove, don't get there, and the child somehow pushes past them, rushes past them. I'm going to do it anyway. You can't tell me what to do. It's like the high schooler who says, I can't wait till I'm 18 so that I can live the way I want. I want to live according to what's right in my eyes. Sound familiar? And that just breaks a parent's heart, because like, you live according to what's right in your eyes. You don't see that there's consequences to that. You don't see that you don't understand how you're going to make life happen when you make those choices, when you burn those bridges. And that's what happened. And as you read it this week, they get run over by enemies, they experience food shortages, they experience all kinds of trouble. And then what do? They cry out for God to help. And God did what God does. We learned this back in Exodus. When you cry out to God for deliverance, God delivers. Number 5, divine deliverance. And we learn that in Moses' story. He always delivers, not in our timing, not in our method, and he never just delivers us from, he also wants to deliver us to a deeper relationship with him. But they don't always say yes to that. They just want to be delivered. And so what do? When they don't say yes to what God is delivering them to, they just want to be delivered from. Takes us to number 6, repeat. You see the cycle? I want to put the entire cycle here on the screen. And do you see yourself in it? Are you in the place right at the beginning where you're following God and everything's great? Are you in a place where you're beginning to drift just a little bit? Are you saying you believe God, but you're living the way you want? Are you caught in consequences in some areas of your life? Are you caught in the repeat cycle, I can't get out of this, I can't get out of this, I can't get out of this, I can't get out of this? Man, I've been caught there before. I've been caught there before. And here's the question for us. Is how do you break the cycle? And to close it this week, I want to take us to a second strategy and take us down here to my story. And we need to learn how to spot it before we can learn how to break it, because you can't break something that you don't know is there. You can't break something if you don't know where you are. But I want to teach us just very quickly here at the end some strategies, 4 strategies, to learn how to break the sin cycle. Because even though it looks like it in Judges, even though it feels like it sometimes for you and for me, you don't have to get stuck here. You don't have to run the whole cycle and then break out. You can break it at any time. 4 strategies. Here's the first one. Be ruthless about maintaining your relationship with God. I don't know how many relationships, couples, or marriages end up in my office, and they're on the brink of breaking up, or they have broken up. And if we could take time, I could guarantee you I could trace it back to there was a point in time when one or both, more often or not both of them, said, you know what, I don't have to work it as hard anymore at this relationship because everything is going good. You hear what happens there? Taking the relationship for granted. Think about this. This is in any area of life. In the marketplace, athletes, artists, whatever a person does, when a person is incredibly good and then falls, it doesn't happen overnight. They drift in a way that leads them in a series of small choices towards not being as good. The basketball player says, I don't need to pay attention to the basics anymore. I don't need to practice free throws and layups. And the greats always keep to the basics, right? The artist says, I don't need to practice my fingerings. I don't need to practice my parts. Marriage, I don't need to practice intentional talk. And on and on and on. And as followers of Jesus, oh man, this is so easy for us to get caught in, right? As people start to follow Jesus, one of the traps we fall into, one of the subtle drifts, is we take the basics for granted. I don't need a regular time in the Word. I'm too busy or too uncomfortable about getting into a small group. I've got too much going on. I'll get to that time with you to sit in silence like we talked about last week and keep God at the center. That's so countercultural. I can't do that today. There's too much on my to-do list. There's too much of a schedule. The very last book of the Bible God says, you need to go back to the things you did at first. And part of what he was talking about is you've lost your first love. You've gotten cold there. Don't neglect the small choices that seem insignificant, but they affect the big part of your relationship. And it's true about your relationship with God. Second part of this strategy, regularly ask God if you're rebelling against him. Now, I know this may seem kind of weird, but if you ask God if you're rebelling against him, he'll tell you. You can say, how would I not know? Well, there have been times in my life when I made choices, and because of the subtle drift, I began to justify them. I began to kind of explain them and think that somehow God, in some twisted way, was okay with them, until I actually took the time to say, God, am I rebelling against you? And he put his finger on it and said, right here. And I went, oh, how did I get here, God? In fact, let's practice that right now. Because if you ask God, he'll tell you. So you can right now, wherever you are, you can just ask him. Go ahead and do it. Say, God, would you tell me? Jesus, would you tell me if I'm rebelling against you in any area of my life? Just pray that. And then let's just sit for just a few seconds and listen. Go and pray that. Jesus, would you tell me if there's any area in my life where I'm rebelling against you? You say, well, how will I know if it's his voice? There'll be an impression. There'll be an image. He'll make it obvious. He'll give you a feeling. He'll point something out, and you'll get maybe again a sense of guilt, a little bit of shame of, how did I get there? And he'll tell you. For some of us, because we're so not used to listening for his voice, we might need to sit longer than is comfortable. Number 3, learn to pray a prayer that you won't want to pray. This is a great prayer for parents to pray, but you won't want to pray it, parents, for your kids. Ask God to let you get caught before it gets worse. Maybe you're in a pattern of financial decisions, a lack of financial integrity, a lack of financial stewardship, and you don't want to admit it. There's this shame, and you say, God, help this to come out in the open so that it gets worse. Maybe you're caught in an addiction of pornography and alcohol. God, let this get out in the open before it gets worse. Parents, pray this for your kids. It'll be hard. God, if they're doing anything wrong, let them get caught before they make a choice, before they do something that damages them in a long-standing way and needs greater healing. Basically, what we're saying is, Jesus, we trust your love. We trust that everything you do is good. So discipline me. Stop me before I get more messed up. Break the cycle. And finally, ask God to deliver you if you're stuck. And we've learned this, haven't we? We've learned this. God delivers. So here's the question. Where are you at in the cycle? You can break it. You can break the cycle, not by yourself. You can break it with God's help. And that's the whole point of the entire book of Judges. You can break the cycle. You can stop living on repeat. Ask God to deliver you. Maybe for you, you've never asked God to deliver you for the first time. And right now, you can ask him to become your deliverer, your Savior, to forgive you of your sin and begin to teach you what a promised land life looks like. You can pray that simple prayer right now. Jesus, forgive me of my sin. And I invite you to become the leader of my life and help me to learn to follow you. If you prayed that prayer, that's the beginning of an incredible journey. And our team's going to come on here in just a moment and give you a next step, because that's the first step and your next step matters. But for all of us this week, my prayer for you is that you learn the cycle and learn to break it, because with God's help you can. Have a great week.
Well, hey, church, we just want to thank you once again for joining us today for the second week of Promised Land. Such a great message from Pastor Mike. It's an awesome time of worship, and we just hope that you found today's service valuable and that it encourages you to take a next step.
Yeah, and I want to talk to those of you who took the biggest next step that you
Yes.
can take, those of you who prayed that
Yep.
prayer with Pastor Mike. We just want to say, yay!
Yes,
We are so
congratulations.
excited for you.
Yep.
Congratulations.
So
And
awesome.
as part of your church family, we just want to come alongside you and support you and again encourage you to pray for you.
Yeah.
And so we want to know if you made that decision today, if you prayed that prayer with Pastor Mike. And there's one really easy way that you can do that. If you text 701-501-8002, text the word NEXT to that number, and we'll follow up with a text. We'll collect your name because again, we would just love to know that you made that decision. And when you text that, you'll be taken to a website that has information. It's got a Bible reading plan. We talk
Yeah.
about baptism, what Christians believe. Just a really cool resource for
Yeah.
you. So we really encourage you to check that out.
Yeah, we love you so much, and we're so excited for you, as Hattie was saying, and we just want to make sure that we can come alongside you and talk about what's next. Because
Yeah.
that might have been the biggest next step, but there's always a next step for us.
Yeah,
We
that's
say it
good.
on the Grow podcast, we say it every week, that growth always starts with the next step, and we want to continue growing for our whole lives, whether we just came to know the Lord today or whether we've known him our whole lives. There's always a next step for us. So make sure you do text that number so that we can help you take that next step. And then the next step for all of us, I want to encourage you to check out the Grow podcast. If you haven't been checking out the Grow podcast, I think it's like 70 something episodes now.
That's a lot of
A lot of
episodes.
great teaching from Pastor Mike while I sit there and sometimes
You're a great host.
toss like a goofy comment his way, and it's pretty fun for me. I'm
It
not
makes
gonna
it
lie.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, very
it's
fun.
it's such a good podcast, and it would be good whether I'm there or not. So I
does-
feel like I'm allowed to. Do you think it's good? I'm on it, so I feel weird.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's so good.
It's a great podcast. Pastor Mike kind of teaches in more of a conversational style, and he just goes deeper into the message. And if you haven't checked it out since this Greatest Story Ever Told series has started, so Threads and now Promised Land, you really should check out the Grow podcast because not that it wasn't tying in well before to what he was teaching, but 31 weeks through the Bible, there's a lot of stuff in there that he's not getting to.
Especially when
during
he's
his
teaching
messages.
a book a
Right,
day.
the entire book of Judges.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite podcasts we've ever done because I just got to throw a lot of some of my favorite stories and things from Judges at him.
Classic David finding the weirdest things in the Bible.
Yeah, it was great.
And asking
Pastor
Pastor
Mike,
Mike.
why is this in there?
Gotta listen to this
Yeah,
one
it's a
for
really
sure.
good one. So make sure you check it out. The new episodes go live every Monday, and you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. The video is on Apple Podcasts and on YouTube. And I want to encourage you, if you normally listen on Mondays, but maybe you missed, we had a special episode go up last week. So go check that one out too. A really cool special episode, a non-numbered episode. So check out the Grow podcast. Make sure you're back here next week for week 3 of Threads. And yeah, we just love you guys so much. And we hope to see you next week. Until then, let's go and be the church.
I'm singing out your lovely name. I'm giving you everything. You make my soul alive. You put your love inside. And there's nothing that I'd have need of, 'cause there's nothing you haven't done. You make my soul alive. You put your love inside. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. I've made up my mind. I'm never going back. I'm never going back. You call me your own. I'm never going back. I'm never going back.
Hello.
Accents.
Would you like me to talk like this today?
Let's see how many accents Olivia can do today. Don't practice.
Yeah.
What was that one?
Don't practice.
I'm sorry.
We'll talk about accents.
Yeehaw.
Oh,
No,
you're not
unfortunately, I was
Is that
not.
matey?
Don't practice.
Hattie's throwing out her plans.
I'm gonna turn this one up because it's always pretty.
That's
quiet.
me.
I know.
No one wants me to be louder.
Actually, you are usually louder than the rest of us.
Who just cawed?
Who do you think?
we
That was
didn't
her
put-
bird accent.
See, I can't do it. I did that one time.
Back to the bird. Back to the bird.
Thanks for double checking.
That's great.
I don't know how to do the rest of
I'm
it.
not gonna do anything where I have to like make noises and like.
Okay, we're good.
Ready?
Yep, I just have to call to the birds and I'm ready to go.
You're good.
This is gonna be a great episode.